you go to your workplaces. Just like we organize meetings on Syria, please organize meetings on the Scramble for Africa, on the situation in Africa, which is also one of the Stop the War campaigns. And we from Kilombo who are here, we have been involved with the Stop the War Coalition since it was set up. We'll be able to get speakers to come to wherever you organize these meetings to come and do presentations. So let's take that first. Then I will come to the situation in Africa. In fact, if you look at most of the places in Africa which are the flashpoints of war, the countries that they refer to, you see that the history of those countries have been such that they have been organized in a way to fail. Jeremy started talking about the Congo, and he talked about the past. And it didn't stop just with the Belgians and the atrocities which were carried, the way in which people's hands were cut if they didn't bring enough rubber and all that. But even when Congo became independent, Congo had one of the most committed Africans, product of the first All Africa People's Conference, Patrice Lumumba. And when he took over, he was not allowed to rule that country for even a year. What happens is that when they have committed people, they are prevented from ruling, so you don't have evidence that Africans can have a good record. Then they are replaced by their own products of the Mobutus, who mismanage on their behalf and they control, and then they are used as examples of why Africa has a problem. You look at Somalia, a country with one dominant religion, one dominant language, but when the African countries were being divided, this country has a potential of being united. That one was divided between the French, the Italians, and the British. So that even when there is the potential of unity, there's disintegration according to the way it is dismembered. And with the other ones, what they did was that the boundaries were arbitrarily drawn so that you have the connecting sub-nationalities of the African nation spread over the boundaries, so you have the centrifugal forces greater than the centripetal forces in the country, so that you have a chaos. And this is what, Central African Republic, which is recently in the news. In fact, Central African Republic started as Ubangi Shari, with the French distributing it to commercial concessionaries. So it was like business units, pockets of business units. And if you create a country as a pocket of business units, then you can see what will be the result sometime in history. So these are examples of the way in which the various countries were created. What we have today in the new phase is the introduction of the AFRICOM and the various military pacts. So I'm militarizing the politics. In the 80s, we fought against military regimes to reduce militarization of our politics, but there has been international militarization of our politics with the setting up of the AFRICOM. In fact, this whole thing has been a struggle for resources. Because in 2006, they had a summit of the African ministers and heads of state with the Chinese in Beijing. 2006, the preparatory ground for AFRICOM also started. So you see that even the timing shows that there's a present competition between China and the US, and the US together with the West over the control of our resources. And when you look at the way the Chinese are also building their roads, and we go to places like Kenya, exactly the same way with the British colonial rulers build the roads to the resources, the Chinese are also building it along that side. You see, apart from that, we'll look at various initiatives which have been taken by various Western powers. Tony Blair set up the African Commission when he was Prime Minister. After he left as Prime Minister, Tony Blair has now set up the African Governance Initiative, which he is saying that he's helping Africans to be able to do what has been done by the South Asian countries. And then we consider someone like Tony Blair a war criminal who sets up the African Governance Initiative for Africa after he has left the office with his war crimes. And he's currently having staff working in Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Guinea, Malawi, South Sudan. And you can see that even the places he's working are the places that are flashpoints of conflict. And so he has set up this institution to intensify the conflict and not to resolve the problem. See, when I look at the way in which the countries have been created and the way in which the past has contributed to this, what it means is that we have to reverse the structures which have been laid by the Berlin Conference. Next year marks the 130th anniversary of the Berlin Conference, and we are going to organize a conference in Africa, in a border town, so it's not inside one country, as a way of mobilizing people against the Berlin Conference and the negative effects that it's having in our continent. And so, through that, what we see as the way forward will be to be able to organize from the grassroots, not from the top, because the top structures in our continent have inherited the colonial structures and the Berlin Conference structures, which are only for the distraction and dismemberment of the sub-nations of the African nations. And so we organize from below, and so that identifying that the two pillars of which external forces have controlled our continent and through which the domestic class which is in office, not actually ruling, who is office on behalf of the external forces, have been through the economic power and through the military strength. And because of that, we identify the various struggles which have gone on in our continent in the 80s against the increased militarization of politics and also against the austerity measures on the continent. And to be able to rebuild on the strength of such movements from below, network them throughout the continent and build a movement that can bring about change. Because we recognize that it is the control of state power that will be able to bring about change. The state power is used by forces on behalf of the external forces, of the external concerns, and it leads to politics which is not in the interest of the majority of our people or the masses of our people. So through mobilizing the masses of our people on the basis of movements which fought but were defeated in the 80s, in almost every African country during the 80s, after the collapse of the Eastern Europe, there were forces which were fighting to ensure that what has become the neoliberal politics of today it's not what should be used in directing affairs on the continent. But these forces lost, in both cases, to the forces which have come to intensify the politics of militarization and neoliberal politics. And so we are rebuilding on the basis of those movements throughout, and in solidarity and in joint work with external forces which are also for social justice. And that is why we are here in this conference, so we will be able to change the situation. The world we live in has not always been like this. It's been shaped by men and women before us. And the task to change it, the ability to change it, is the task of you and I, and it can be done.
Time is brief. We've got about 25 minutes before we have to wrap up for the next session. So what I'll ask for is, what I'll do is take 2 or 3 points or questions. Please be concise, and then I'll invite the speakers to respond. So if you can put your hands up, and I'd also ask if you can just introduce yourselves as well at the beginning. Do we have wandering mics in the room at all? Do we have anyone with a mic? Okay. Gentleman over here first, yeah, in the grey.
Tom Burke, years ago, when the organisation of